Hello, everyone, and welcome to the new day of National Children's Week. We are so excited to have all of you with us this morning for me on the West Coast, early afternoon for some of you on the East Coast. Thank you all for joining us. We have an amazing day of events. We have panels on foster care and rehoming, which you'll see in just a few minutes, put together by our amazing partners, the Adoption Advocacy Network. We have a panel on racial justice right after that. So you'll get to experience some amazing young organizers who are leading the fight in the streets right now. And we'll finish up the day with some content on child immigration and what some of our amazing partners are doing around the country and around the world to make a difference on behalf of children in some really vulnerable situations. So thank you all for joining us. We are so excited to have you with us. I'm going to pass it over now to one of our amazing NCC youth organizers, Rani Chor, who has worked so hard on this last panel, or on this next panel, I should say, the foster care and rehoming panel. Rani's going to give a quick introduction. So without further ado, Rani.
Hi. Hello, everyone. My name is Rani Chor, and I'm an organizer at the National Children's Campaign from Los Angeles, California. So in the United States, the number of youth in foster care is growing exponentially. On any given day, more than 437,000 children in the foster care system, which is roughly the population of Cleveland, Ohio. Over 125,000 of these children are eligible for adoption, and yet 23,000 age out of the foster care system every year. What is known as the foster care to homelessness pipeline disproportionately affects African American children, who are 1.8 times more likely to become homeless. As of 2018, 23% of the foster care system consisted of Black youth, considering that Black and African Americans only make up 13.4% of the US population. And this amounts to 99,025 children in the system. 90,688 foster youth are Latinx. 3,165 of foster youth are Asian, and 10,449 foster youth are Indigenous. 193,117 of foster youth are white. The Trump administration has enabled legal discrimination that has hurt children in foster care by reducing the number of families to care for them. Recognizing this, advocates and policymakers have made efforts to prevent children from entering the system and to safely reduce the number of children living in foster care, particularly in group homes. Here are some great people who are here to speak about foster care and rehoming, some of which have dedicated their lives to advocating about this issue. Thank you so much to Connie for selecting these panelists and putting this panel together.
Awesome. Thank you, Rani. And now we're going to pass it right over to our wonderful panel, and I will let them get started.
Hi, everyone. There we are. Terrific. I want to thank all the panelists for being here and for tuning in. Those that are at home, at work, on your computer, on your phone, thank you so much. We are so excited to have you here. I'm going to introduce Maureen Flatley, who is just one of the most incredible women in the world of child adoption and has done so much for advocacy. And let her tell you a little bit about herself and how we're going to start the panel going.
Thanks, Connie. This is a topic, as you know, that is very important to me. I began my career in child welfare and adoption advocacy about 25 years ago, and I was stunned to realize that this practice of what is commonly called rehoming, officially called unregulated custody transfer, had not only been going on, but it had been going on for a long time, and it was perfectly legal in America. So over the years, I've tried to aggregate some knowledge about the topic, work to fight the practice, ban the practice, and protect the interests of kids. And so I'm happy today that we have a group of what I consider to be the real experts here, including 3 people who have actually experienced rehoming firsthand. So I think we're gonna have a good conversation that looks at the reality of rehoming, the policy implications, and what we can do to stop it. So maybe I should talk a little bit about what this is and what this means. The name rehoming is actually lifted from animal welfare policy. And if you were to go to, say, the Lucky Dog Animal Rescue Program in Arlington, Virginia, to adopt a pet, you would actually have to sign a contract that you could not rehome that pet, give that pet to a third party total stranger. You would have to return it to the agency, and they would make sure that it was safe and placed in another appropriate home. But unfortunately, in the United States, that's not the case for children. And in fact, this is a practice that is not new. It dates back really to the era of the orphan trains in the 1850s in America, where children were taken from New York City and literally put on a train and dropped off in cities and towns all across America. Sometimes those families took kids they didn't really want, or they maybe wanted to use them as hands, but when they were finished with them, they give them away to a third person. That was over 100 years ago. It's something that many people think only happens in international adoption, but as our panel here today demonstrates, that's certainly not the case. Joy experienced rehoming, more than 40 years ago now, after she was adopted from Korea. But Taylor and Terri, who are both in the child welfare system, have experienced it much more recently in a completely different context. One reason that adoption has not dealt with this is that there are different kinds of adoptions and they're regulated differently. So we think of adoption as a state law issue, which really has never been true, especially when you look back at the orphan trains. But in fact, we have different kinds of adoption. There's private infant adoption, and rehoming happens there, but probably not as much. You have intercountry adoption, which is now thankfully regulated by the State Department to some extent, but we still see rehoming in that context. And of course, in the child welfare system, rehoming has been an issue for many years. So perhaps in some instances, the kids are returned to the state. That's not necessarily any indication that they're going to be safe. But in any event, these different kinds of adoption are regulated by different people. And so there really hasn't been any kind of consistent, coherent approach once the child is placed in an adoption home. My attitude is that once a child has been adopted, wherever they come from, whether it's Korea or Kansas City, that is an American child protection issue if that child is at risk of leaving that family. So fortunately, some people in Congress actually agree. And so there's a bill in Congress right now sponsored by Congressman Jim Langevin from Rhode Island, that would actually define rehoming as a form of child abuse and neglect in federal law, that would then put the states on notice that they had to regulate the practice in a much more coherent, consistent way. You know, when you think about it, if you sell a house or a car or a boat, there's a legal process that requires you to, excuse me for 1 second, I'm going to put my earbuds in because I'm hearing a little echo. There's a legal process that requires you to record the ownership, if you will, of that article. But there's really no comparable process involving children. So what this bill would seek to do, and Congress would seek to do, is actually make sure that the child is in a system somewhere, that people know where that child is, that that child's safe, and that there's adequate screening, and that the child's protected. The one last thing I want to say about this topic before we move on to the panelists is that there's a tremendous tendency for people to minimize rehoming as somehow the child's fault, that the child was somehow damaged or the child was somehow not what they were portrayed to be. But I certainly feel that in my work in this area over now a pretty long period of time, I can tell you that one of the major problems that leads to rehoming is poor screening of families, and especially bad home studies, careless home studies that do not thoroughly examine the family's background, the family's capabilities, and really what the family envisions the adoption experience to be like. So when people tell you, well, of course they gave that kid up, there was something wrong with that kid, I'm here to tell you that is not always the case. In fact, it's often not the case. And we really need to stop blaming the victim. So among us here today, we have some people that are very dear to me that I want to engage in this discussion. Connie has got a wonderful program that provides a tremendous amount of post-adoption support to families. Joy, who is a dear friend and colleague, was adopted from Korea many years ago, was rehomed not long after her adoption. Terri and Taylor have both experienced the child welfare system in ways that most of us can't even imagine. So I'd actually like to jump over to the adoptee experience for a few minutes, Connie, and then maybe we can talk about how to mitigate this problem. So Joy, we talk about this all the time. People say, rehoming, it's a new problem. It never used to happen. What does it feel like to be rehomed? What does it feel like to be an adoptee who all of a sudden one day finds that they're not in a forever family?
Thank you, Maureen, so much for bringing attention to this and for your constant effort on this and presence. I can tell you that this is an age-old issue. I'm surprised that it's taken this long to address it. I'm surprised to hear that it's still occurring. Even under the best of circumstances with regulations, I'm living proof of that. There's still so many things wrong. We definitely need reform. For those of us who were adopted decades ago, and when I say decades, I was adopted in the mid 1960s. It's so disheartening to see that this is a trend that is not improving at all. But I think for those of us who are adopted and transferred and rehomed and have gone through all of those variables of disruption, I think that it just compounds the sort of lifelong sort of emotional as well as physical and economical instability. So I think that that's what we really see. We see a lot of legal problems that result from that. And these are, the sad thing about this, I would have to say, is that these are manufactured problems.
So Joy, you and I have talked about this a lot in the context that we have a lot of older adoptees who, because they were rehomed, for instance, never gained citizenship. The families that adopted them never bothered to ensure that they were legal citizens of the United States. Now, with the hostile immigration environment that we're in, we're actually seeing those adoptees being deported. Several people have actually committed suicide because they returned to countries that they had no memory of. They didn't speak the language. And I think that you've just kind of raised an issue that I think is going to be very relevant to the sector that Taylor and Terri have experienced as well, which is that kids enter the adoption system oftentimes because of trauma. Adoption is supposed to address some of their unmet needs with attachment, with permanency, with care and well-being. And when that promise is betrayed to the child, and as I said before, oftentimes the child is actually blamed for what's happening. If I read one more post by the Stouffer family in Ohio about poor little Huxley and how he was mean to one of their other kids, and that's one of the reasons they got rid of him, I'm going to scream. So, Terri, maybe this would be a good time to jump to you, because I know that you've really been victimized by this process. Is that right? Can you describe your own experience a little bit?
Okay, so I was put in foster care around like 2 or 3 years old. When I got adopted at age 7, I At first, it was going really great. Like the first year was going really great, and then once that grace period was over with, kind of, it was like really devastating. It was really traumatic. Like everything went downhill. When I turned, when I was about 14 years old, I was put into a group home called Brookwood, Florida, and they kind of just like dropped me off and wiped their hands with me when I turned, and I just stayed there like ever since. And when I turned 18, I contacted them, my adopted parents, to see if I can get my um my my foster care records so I can see for myself like what really happened, what really went down. But they were like, "We're not giving them to you. What, do you not trust us?" And I'm like, "I'm not saying that."
No, you don't at that point, right?
Yeah, I'm not saying that at all. It's just like I've been told this, this, and that. I've been told everything between A to Z. Like, I just want to know the truth, you know? Like, I want to see it for myself. But so after they kind of like wiped their hands with me, I've been like, it's been really rough. I mean, PTSD, anxiety, depression, ADHD. I mean, like all of it is just like really hard, really hard.
Hey, so Terri, do you know, are they or were they collecting adoption subsidy payments after you left their house?
I believe so, but all of it was going directly towards my room and board at Brookwood.
Okay, okay,
I believe. I'm not really quite sure, but
okay. So Taylor, buddy, my favorite. Yeah, well, everybody's my favorite today, but Taylor, you've lived through some stuff that the average adult in this country could never imagine. And like Terri, have been subjected to a lot of uncertainty. Tell us what that felt like.
So I came in the system when I was 3. My parents were heavily addicted to drugs. Within 2 years, I was in a little bit over 40 foster homes, and I got adopted at the age of 5 with my 2 biological sisters. Actually, I didn't know that I had sisters until I was 5, until I got adopted with them. Kind of like Terri, there was kind of like a grace period, where everything was, happy and good. And then the abuse started, like not even a few months in, maybe 3-4 months in, just over stupid stuff. It was really bad. I'm not going to get into that. But about a year and a half into the adoption, they realized that they couldn't handle me anymore because of my anger. And I had a lot of issues when I first got adopted. And so they weren't properly equipped to deal with a kid kind of like me. And so they ended up putting me in a group home, kind of like Terri as well. And but that wasn't the first one. I was in 3 group homes with them. One of them was a lockdown facility, where they just never came to visit me. So they kind of just dropped me off at this place for a year and a half until I moved, and that's when I saw them. And it wasn't until I was 9 years old that I got Baker acted at this place called PIMS here in Florida, and they came in and said that they didn't want to be my parents anymore. And so after a year of unimaginable abuse and 3 years of lockdown facilities, group homes, not being able to see my sisters, all the games that they played with me, they just finally terminated their rights. And the worst thing about it, though, is that my sisters ended up staying with that family. So for many, many years, I was kind of stuck in this battle with these parents that I'm sitting here now fighting for visitation with my sisters. I was 9.5, when I went in front of the judge and I had to ask her for monthly, visitation with my sisters. And then they quickly figured out that they didn't have to by law let me see them. And so I didn't see my sisters for a few years at that point. And it wasn't until I got adopted by my current mom, which is Connie, that I finally, reached out to them. And it wasn't until the abusive father died that the mother kind of let me back into my sisters' lives. And my opinion on the whole thing is that, you adopt a kid and you take on this responsibility, but you should first like be vetted. You know what I mean? Make sure that you're actually equipped to take on a kid, especially like me, because I was very, very traumatized from a very young age. And so I had a lot of things that I did that just didn't make sense to a lot of people. And, my sisters, they didn't really go through as much as me. And so they weren't, as crazy as you'd call it. And so the fact that they can, get rid of me, but keep my sisters, I think that's a very big flaw in the system, because, I potentially could have never seen my sisters again. Because
I actually want to talk about that for a minute, because I'm glad you brought it up. This is an aspect of, well, first of all, I want to say one other thing. When you said, you were crazy, you were acting appropriately for the experiences that you had been subjected to.
Mm-hmm.
It was not on you, buddy. It was on the system. It was on the people around you who were adults.
Well,
You are one of the most rock solid people I know. And if you hadn't had that core and that inner strength, you wouldn't be the person you are today. But anyway, back to the family stuff. So I have seen many, 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 many cases of rehoming where siblings were separated, where a family kept the good kids, often girls, and then separated out one or two children and really brought a wall down and didn't let those kids have any kind of contact with each other until somebody was emancipated. And that's an aspect of this problem that I think we really need to address and we really need to talk about. Because, adoption, when people think of adoption, they think babies on fluffy clouds, teddy bears, I'm going to be a big hero, I'm going to adopt this kid. And, maybe 40 or 50 or 60 years ago, most of the kids being adopted were babies. And maybe there weren't siblings in the picture. But as the average age of kids being adopted to the United States or in the United States has gone from, say, birth to now, the average age might be from 6 to 8 years of age, with kids younger and older than that. These are children who, A, knew their birth parents, had a relationship with them in many instances, knew their extended family, knew their siblings, had a strong, sometimes their siblings were the only ones they were attached to. In foster care, there's been this, I think, more recent effort to keep siblings together, but not totally. When we're talking international adoption, Joy, you and I have talked about this many times, that maybe you have siblings, maybe you don't. It depends dramatically on the country that you come from. But in many instances, and I'll just use Ethiopia as an example, this is a country where there were a lot of kids in large sibling groups in the adoption system, but they separated them routinely and had no method for that kids to have any kind of contact. So when you talk about rehoming, Taylor, you just brought up to me one of the most fundamentally abusive aspects of the practice, which is if you're a child who's already been abused or neglected or been literally orphaned, your parents have died, and you have siblings, those siblings are everything. Mm-hmm. And so to be put in a situation where a poorly screened family, without adequate support, without adequate education, and sometimes without adequate oversight, separates you from them, that's a whole other kind of trauma that the system that's supposed to be helping you is inflicting on you. So, Connie, maybe this is where you come in, because I know this is an area that's been important to you. And you've also adopted two kids who were rehomed in pretty high profile cases, and you provide some terrific family support. You want to talk about how we can, what we need to do to change these practices to make it kid-centric.
You muted.
Yeah, you're muted.
Okay, I don't think I'm muted anymore. Hi.
There we go.
I just want to thank you, Joy and Taylor and Terri, for sharing some of your journeys, because that is really how we're going to learn to change the system. And I am amazed because it is an ageless problem. It was around 30 years ago, and I know it was before that, Joy, and we see more and more. And what I see traditionally are that families are not prepared, they are not trained, they are not supported, they don't know. But on top of that, I don't feel the system knows the children either. I feel that trauma is undiagnosed. They are not given the proper assessments that they need to say, this is, when I adopted Taylor, I knew him for a long time while he was in the system as an administrator of that system. And I knew the potentials and what some of, now, was it easy? Was it easy, Taylor?
Yeah.
It was not easy.
Not on your part.
But you know what? We're family. And I think that we have to find families who are not rigid, who are flexible, who are accepting, who are willing to parent differently. And that means not like how you were raised. And focus on the child's needs and not your own. I think as a system, we do not assess that in home studies. I read hundreds of home studies. As I have an agency, we write home studies. I mean, and people go, we don't have a crystal ball. But the fact is, there are things that we can look at, and there are types of home studies that can be done better and assessments. And yes, there were signs, but nobody listened. And then once
in every single rehoming case that I've ever examined directly, like for the child or for the child's attorney, the home study was appalling, ignored big screaming red flags.
I think screening red flags, I think emotional, I think, things, their own trauma, the things that are happening, and we have got to change that. So I think that's, one of the number one things. I think the other thing we have to look at is that we have to know the children. We have to assess correctly where their trauma is coming from and what are the best ways to work through that as a family, not fixing the child. If I hear one more person tell me that their child needs to be fixed, I'm going to scream, because it is not my children who needed to be fixed. It was my parenting, my family, how we looked at the whole situation. So you don't just, and there's no perfection in this. There's no perfection. There's processing and there's due diligence. And, families have got to know that. But I think we never listened to these children too once they were in the system. We didn't listen to them in the adoptive homes. I mean, Taylor was crying out literally in that adoptive home. There were no available services, but he would get himself, and tell me if Taylor, you would get yourself Baker acted on purpose. Yeah.
Can you explain what that is, what it means to be Baker acted?
So a Baker Act unit is basically for suicidal people, first and foremost, but also, for younger kids who have issues, who have to be removed from the home for a few days. You basically get sent to this unit for 3 days, sometimes longer if they decide to keep you longer. And I've been Baker acted maybe hundreds of times in my life. Never for the suicide aspect, but just because I really used to get Baker acted on purpose in order to spend a few days outside of that home, because I was getting abused every single day. And there was no other way around it other than to, make him mad enough to call the police on me and get me taken out.
I mean, of course I know your story really well, but you're a classic example of a young person who really knew what you needed all along, and you weren't getting it. And, to Connie's point about screening the families don't understand their own trauma. People say to me all the time, oh, adoption's just like having a baby. And I'm like, no, it's not anymore. Adoption's like getting married. And you're dealing with another human being who has had a life. And there's accommodation to that, and there's empathy that's required, and there's a process to develop attachment. And so, you and I have talked a little bit about this, Taylor, over the years, that you probably had more attachment to that family than they had to you. They just were overwhelmed and didn't know what to do. But you, even when you were a little kid, instinctively knew that you had to get out of there for a little bit. because something bad was going to happen. It's unbelievable. So Terri, where are you today? Where are you going with your life?
I'm not really quite sure. I mean, like, I'm still struggling. Like, I've been in therapy ever since, ever since I got adopted. So I'm really trying to figure out, like, how I can stop all of this mental, all of this, like, mental stuff that's going on in my head, and trying to reconnect with my siblings as well, and make a, like, positive, you know, relationship, I guess you could say, with them, and not being so triggered by, my bio parents and my adopted family, and, try not to get traumatized any more than I put myself through,
How old are you now?
24.
Well, we'll be in touch with you after this because I'm sure there's some things that we can do to help you at least get and stay in the right groove, because I say this all the time about kids that have survived the system like this. You guys may feel like victims sometimes, but you are really superheroes, because for you to all be sitting there, and I include you in this, Joy, big time, you all have been through trauma that the average person cannot even begin to imagine, can't begin to imagine. And when we talk about, very much in the headlines right now, the whole issue of law enforcement reform, and, banning the use of chokeholds, we have exactly the same problem in the child welfare system. We have got to do a better job. And you guys, that you have survived this and managed to put your lives where you are, is just, it's humbling to me. I could probably never have done it. But so let's say, Taylor, let's say you're talking to your member of Congress. And we know there's a bill in Congress to ban rehoming, and we know there's a bill in Congress to make home studies better. What would your recommendations be?
Like as a solution to rehoming?
Yeah. Should this something that they shouldn't address? Can they let things go on the way they are?
I mean, of course not, because you have situations, like mine and like Terry's, where, it's almost like we're disposable, whenever they're just done with us. And that's not okay, because, we're humans. And, me, I've been through 47 foster homes, and, to go through all those foster homes and then to go and be adopted for all that time just to get put right back into the foster system and go through more foster homes, like being adopted, and then being rehomed causes more trauma than going through foster care, because you start to form that connection with people, that you expect to be reciprocated, and when it's not, it's like that causes more trauma than foster care does itself. And I've been through crazy things in foster care, and nothing messed me up as bad as, rehoming did. Solutions would be that there should be mandatory systems in place, in my opinion, that help these parents out. In my situation, I needed to get out of there, but also in my situation, they should have taken my sisters too, because, they were very abusive, and they never had our best interests at heart. And so, when the system recognizes that, it's like, why is this family getting rid of one kid? What is the reason for that? Obviously it's not the kid's fault. And so what are these parents doing to these other, two kids that are still stuck in the home? Maybe somebody should be sent out to check on them. Maybe somebody, when I was going through my stuff, Connie came out, and, she was trying to talk to them, and she told them, she said, you cannot give up on him. And, they did anyways. But, having somebody like what Connie did as a normal routine thing, being like, when families are having struggles and they want to rehome, instead of that being an option, there should be systems in place where they have all the support that they can get. Because a lot of the times it's literally just, I've been through a lot of crap in my life, and I don't understand how to necessarily express it in the right way. And you should be taught the right ways to deal with children like me. Children, hundreds of thousands of kids just like me that are going to get adopted, and it's never going to be easy because adoption never is. And, we just don't have enough support for people right now. And if we had more support, we would have more successful adoptions.
You just said something that reminded me of something that I had meant to mention, that when workers go out to supervise the placement, which of course doesn't always happen, but when it does, what do they mostly do? They mostly talk to the parents. Mm-hmm. And a couple of years ago, I did a panel with a couple of girls from Ethiopia who were rehomed in a very horrible, horrible way, again, with sibling separation. But when the congressman asked them what they thought should happen, they said, well, first of all, when the caseworker comes to the house to do the supervision, they really need to talk to the kids. Mm-hmm. And if they don't speak, they need to have somebody who's hearing the child's language if the child's not an English speaker. And they really need to hear from us what's going on, because she said if they had talked to us, they would have gotten a very different story than what they heard. And then, of course, the family concealed the rehoming, and the kids were in a horribly, horribly dangerous situation. Joy, can you talk a little bit, because you and I both have seen some of the worst of this, especially with Philip Clay's suicide. Can you talk a little bit about the sort of longitudinal impact of this that you've seen among your peers? Taylor and Terri are in their early 20s. You're a little older than that, and we both know some of the people that the suicide rates and depression and mental illness and so forth.
Yes. Well, I think Taylor says something very important here, and that is the idea of children being disposable. And I think that's, I've not seen any change in that, system-wide.
Of course.
Why are we disposable? To me, it seems as though we have an issue where so much of the focus in this child welfare industry, if you will, is focused on family placement, and that's the end goal, is family placement. But I argue that family placement is just the beginning, that the end goal is the health and the longevity of the child as they grow into an adult. And I can't stress enough, I'm here to say that it's a horrific road, and it takes years, if ever, to recover from this. So I'm in my mid-50s, and I'm still trying to figure out how, what things happened legally and structurally and emotionally. So it's just not something that is stops at the time the child is placed, and it's not something that stops when the child has grown out or outgrown the child welfare system. In my case, the day I turned 18 was the day that my foster mother told me, you're out, you need to move out, I'm no longer receiving payment for you. I never received any sort of caseworker, a social worker. The social worker that I had never came to visit me, and there was never any sort of exit interview, if you will, that said, okay, here's what's next for you. And clearly in my case, being transnational, no one checked, or I would say that, actually, let me back up. My foster parents, I have since discovered that my foster parents knew that I was not a citizen. My congressman knew that I was not a citizen, but yet no one did anything about that. So on top of the emotional issues, we have legal issues, and all this amounts to a young person's ability or inability to go out into the world and forge a path for themselves. So you're tying our hands behind our backs in the most vulnerable stages of our lives, and then expecting that that's somehow just going to all disappear when we become adults. It doesn't.
I mean, I think every time we talk about this, Chor, I think about the Adam Kropser case, and this is a has been a fairly high-profile case in the adopted citizenship conversation, but Adam is a classic victim of rehoming, but with the most horrendous and awful side effect. He was adopted from Korea, probably about 45 years ago. He was placed in an adoptive home by the state of Michigan. He was rehomed by that family into a family in Oregon and the father was a pedophile, and so he was severely sexually abused in that placement. He was then abandoned by that family, probably a relief to him at that point. The family wouldn't give him any of his documentation, any of his belongings, so he crept back into their home one night, basically broke in to get his own belongings. The father charged him with burglary. He ended up with a criminal record, and then as the immigration rules changed and it was discovered that he had a criminal record and he had never been naturalized, he was deported to Korea even though he was married, owned a business, and had 3 kids. And he's really been struggling, and that's a scenario that is not on him, that is on us, that's on all of us. So when you see the side effects, the implications of rehoming, the average person goes, oh, first of all, well, that doesn't happen that much. Well, even if it only happens one time, it's too much. But it happens a lot more than every once in a while.
I would like to also, sorry, if I could just interject in that. I just would also like to say that my adoptive parents adopted 2 others after myself as a result of actually being the county temporary shelter family. So while I was suffering abuse, my parents were also the county temporary shelter coordinates. So our home, we actually had foster children coming through our home. And I was old enough, of course, to understand, and my parents understood that there were lines between what we could and could not do with foster children as opposed to myself. So for instance, I got beat, but they knew that they couldn't beat the foster children that were temporarily coming through. But after they adopted my 2 sisters, and then they were no longer the temporary foster people, the beatings were transferred to my sisters. So I have a lot of experience with the internal issues of that. And I went through home studies. My parents went through home study, and I was interviewed. Well, what are your parents like? How do you enjoy your family? And clearly, what was I supposed to say at 13 years old? My parents are awful. I had already numerous phone calls to the police, numerous. But my father was a minister, and how do you go against that? How does the community go against that?
Well, you have brought this up, and Taylor kind of referenced it, but I think about sometimes the solutions can be simple, and when you think about the fact that there's a hotline for battered women, but there's really no hotline for children, and in this particular instance, because so much of rehoming happens outside the legal framework, it almost feels as if all we did was to establish an 800 number that the kids could call, and they gave it to you as a part of your intake package when you're placed, that would probably be a step in the right direction. Anyhow, we're down to about 10 minutes in our time, and I just wanted to put it out there to see if anyone had any questions or comments about the conversation.
Well, in the meantime, while everybody tries to think of some questions, I just wanted to reiterate on, I don't remember who said it, but that adoption is not just like a happily ever after. Like, there are definitely some ups and downs that's definitely going to happen, especially when it comes to traumatic events that happened in our lives.
Yeah, 100%. Connie, any other thoughts or comments?
I just, am amazed that, I mean, there's so many, first of all, I know we're going to touch base a little bit about what's happening as far as laws on a national level, but really, I mean, we could probably go on for 3 hours. I mean, there's just so much to this. And I think it's worth returning to again. So if you guys and out there listening feel like this is something, I heard when we put it out there that it's something that's not discussed enough and spoken about enough. And so I really want to encourage that. So Maureen has some questions.
So we have a question from Facebook. What are some things the government is doing right now around foster care and rehoming? Okay, so a couple of big things. Number one, Congress is really focusing on family support programs. So whether that means keeping kids in their biological families and strengthening families that might be able to be successful with a little extra help, or foster and adoptive placements, families that have taken on kids who are traumatized, that need support, that need more training, that need more respite. But the two other things that Congress is doing that I think are really, really important is, number one, a bill called the Safe Home Act, which would define rehoming as child abuse and neglect in federal law, which would then require the states to implement their own policies in a consistent way that would ensure that kids were at least had a judge they could talk to, perhaps had some real social work, and had a home study to review any successive family that they went to. The other bill that's pending that I'm very involved with is the National Adoption and Foster Care Home Study Act, which is a bill that is designed to raise and strengthen home study standards to make them consistent in all 50 states, to make sure that the home study process isn't just some kind of superficial marketing document, but it becomes a process whereby the family understands what's the best decision for them and how to engage in adoption in a constructive, positive, and successful way. So I think that those several things are extremely important to begin to build a bubble around kids to protect them. And then I think beyond that, we have some quality control issues in the system. And, with people talking about law enforcement the way they are right now, I mean, obviously there are a lot of wonderful police officers, but when something bad happens, we really need to hold people accountable. The same is true with kids. I think that there's another question about how has COVID impacted the foster care system. Very concerned about that. Very difficult to have social distance if you're in a group home. Very difficult to have good health care, prevention, and support when you don't have a home at all. A lot of kids in the system are not in a family situation, and so A, they're more vulnerable to the virus, and B, if they get sick, they really don't have anybody to take care of them. I mean, that all by itself is a problem. Then you go to the staffing issues, and all the systems around the kids are compromised because of the quarantine. We're very concerned that in some jurisdictions there aren't workers responding to emergency calls because of the quarantine, because the workers are sick themselves. So COVID has definitely had a huge impact. And then, of course, daycare is closed, people can't work. So I am concerned in the long run that it's going to compromise our supply of foster and adoptive parents. If families aren't working, if they don't have jobs, if their businesses are in trouble, it's going to be hard for them to take on additional kids. So COVID's had a lot of implications in foster care that some are obvious and some are less obvious, but it's obviously still a serious problem for everybody.
I would like to make a comment on that question
sure.
also. For me, when I was, dealing with the ups and downs of being adopted with my, adopted family, school was my relief. School was where I can get away from all that trauma, from all that abuse, from all that, everything. So I can really feel how these kids are impacted by COVID.
Yeah, actually, that's a really good point, Terri. I hadn't even thought about that.
24 hours a day, yeah.
And Taylor, with you, how many schools did you go to, Taylor? Do you know exactly?
I got expelled from a lot of schools when I was very young, so I couldn't even give you a number.
But it's
Like,
more than like 3.
A few middle schools, a bunch of elementary schools. Yeah, more than 3.
Yeah.
Same with me. I can't really tell, but it's definitely over 10 schools.
Yeah. It's because when
Middle school.
you move homes, you move like districts, sometimes you just have to move schools. And I went to a lot of secondary schools, a lot of, Richard L. Sanders, Hamilton Distant, so, places like that.
Right. And baseball would be hard to continue on a baseball team if you're going to different schools every 5 minutes, right?
Oh yeah. I mean, I didn't even start playing sports till I got adopted, so I never had that opportunity.
Got it.
You always wanted to, and I think that's the thing that as a whole other topic is all the things that you do not, that we could change with the right nonprofits out there for children in foster care, and not just enhance their daily survival, but enhance their self-esteem and how they're feeling, but ultimately permanency in a family that is healthy, that has been home studied, and that has that can do this is a better solution.
Yeah. Well, guys, it's always good to see you. And Terri, it's great to meet you. It's been so fascinating to hear your stories, but it makes me mad, and we still have a lot of work to do. I think we come away from this, Connie. We went into this discussion with one set of things to do, but I think we have some additional tasks now.
Yes, we do. We have one more question. I think. How can people watching at home support your work? Well, Maureen, I know legislatively and working within the political realm, I think is super important. Supporting the bills that are important, knowing the bills.
Right.
I think for just, educating yourself to what these challenges are, what our foster children are going through, what rehoming is. So with that, when you see your state is cutting budgets and they're doing things that are going to cut those services, get involved, learn, because you don't know what you don't know. And so, learning about it is the first key.
I also think the other obvious thing is to become a parent if you want to have a kid in your life. These kids are amazing. They have so much to offer. We need good, strong foster and adoptive parents. And by listening to people like Taylor and Joy and Terri and learning the real issues, it increases the odds of a successful result for kids dramatically. So I would say educate yourself in your own community, look around. If you know a child who's at loose ends, for instance, if you lived in Terri's community, we would want to help find her a job, find a place to live, make sure she's safe. But anyway, we can certainly provide some follow-up information through the organization. It's been great to see everybody, and I think it's time for our next panel. Thanks, guys.
Absolutely. I want to thank everyone too. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you all to our amazing panel there. That was really incredible. Super appreciative of all of you. I believe Brady just has a couple words to close things off, and then we'll head into our next panel.
Okay, thank you to Maureen, Connie, Joy, Taylor, and Terri for diving into your personal experiences and having this important discussion about foster care and rehoming that needed to be had.
Cool. Thanks, Rani. And so now we are going to go into our next panel on Black Lives Matter. Before we have that, we just have a quick video to show, a musical performance courtesy of our partners at the Alphabet Rockers. So if you'll bear with me for one moment, we'll get that up, and then we will go live to our panel. Thanks, everyone.
I'm Tommy, I'm a rapper, I sing, I'm a songwriter, and I play basketball. I'm Black and Chicano, and my pronouns are he, him.
I'm Maya. I'm a dancer, choreographer, and singer. I'm Black and I'm proud. And my pronouns are she and her. I'm Lily. I'm a singer, dancer, and activist. I love school, and my favorite subject is math. I'm Black, Jewish, and Cuban, and I use the gender pronouns she and her. I'm Khalid. I'm a rapper, basketball player, and ally. I'm a quarter white, 3/4 Filipino. I love my mixed heritage. My gender pronouns are he and him.
We're the Alphabet Rockers.
I don't want to throw shade on our last album. I mean, Red Shine Woke was dope and even got a Grammy nomination. It's just that the love went even deeper because we're always learning and growing. It's like our evolution as artists and activists. If I could say something to the 15,000 children in the detention centers, I would say, I'm not free until you're free. In the Alphabet Rockers, I've learned that even though we are kids, we can make a change. So you will be free.
If I could talk to adults in power who lead to hate instead of love, I would tell them, stand up and wake up. The problems in the world right now are bigger than you. It's a cycle to be changed. You could be changed today.
If I could talk to Black kids being teased by the color of our skin, I would say, be proud of our skin color and don't let anyone take it away from us. Don't hide your shine, just let it flow. If I could talk to trans kids being hard to them, stay strong and be who you want to be because you're perfect the way you are. You are not alone. You are not alone. You are not alone. Listen to the love, the sound of freedom.
Listen to the love, sound of indigenous artists.
Listen to the love, the sound of trans youth. Listen to the love, the sounds of Black joy. Listen to the love, the sound of allies like us.
Listen to the love, the sound of gender justice.
Listen to the love. Listen to us.
Up, speak, I'll meet you where you're at. You know that I got your back. So as your friend, I will go with you.
Thank you so much to the Alphabet Rockers for providing us with that amazing video, a little overview of their newest album, The Love. Please check that out. We'll be hearing more from them after this panel when we move into child immigration. But first, we are so blessed and honored to be joined by 4 amazing panelists for our Black Lives Matter panel. So I'm going to pop them all on the screen right now and we can just get into it. Thank you all so much for joining us today.
Hey, hey guys. Thank you, Jonah and NCC, for having us on this panel. We're gonna get into it. So I'm gonna have everyone introduce themselves. My name is Kayla Brathwaite. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Director of Operations at Zero Hour. I'm super excited to have all of us sit down and talk about this topic. So I'm gonna just throw it off to you guys to introduce yourselves. Oh, Claire, so you can go first.
Yeah. Hey, y'all. I'm Clarissa Brooks. I use she, they pronouns. I am a writer, organizer, that whole calamity of things, based in Atlanta, Georgia, but I am from Charlotte, North Carolina.
And Elsa?
Hi, y'all. I'm a student organizer. I'm in New York with an organization called Generation Green, where we are working to connect and uplift Black environmentalists on HBCUs and across the world, while also giving mentorship, support, and resources to Black youth.
And Yulian?
Hey, y'all. My name is Yulian. I use she, her pronouns, and I am actually an organizer with Zero Hour. I'm an operations team member, and I'm also a student organizer at the university. I'm based in Dallas, sorry.
I also forgot to mention I'm from Charlotte, North Carolina. That's where I live right now. So first, I definitely wanted to open up with how are you guys feeling? I know this moment has been ridiculously intense for Black women. And so if you could just explain like what feeling is really sticking with you right now.
Mm-hmm.
I'm really trying to think hard about it. I don't know if it's a feeling, but more of just like the collective exhaustion is definitely really felt. But it's weird because it's like compounded by being on social media, but also social media is like the one place where you can like talk about it in a very specific way. So it's weird. It's like I want to be off of Twitter because I don't want to see Black death all day, but it's also the only place where like it feels like it's in a larger conversation. So it's interesting.
Yeah.
No, yeah, just definitely tired. Everything's just tiring. But we're still here, still doing it.
Yeah, and I basically feel the same way. I would say that like also feel like I don't know what the word is, but you know, like when you just like feel like you're being pulled into like a bunch of different directions, and like I don't know what the word for that is, but yeah, just like overstretched, I guess. But yeah, tired too. I don't know, figuring things out, trying to at least.
Thank you. So the three of you are really like some people that I really admire like in this space. So I definitely wanted to like extend another like extension of gratitude for like hopping on this and speaking with me. And so my first question for us is just like, can we really speak to how systemic racism impacts like how white families and Black families like break down racism like in their homes? Because I know those conversations and those experiences look vastly different.
I don't know. I wouldn't say that like I can't really speak for white families that, but I'm almost 100% sure they don't really have these conversations from the jump, at least when they're children. And like for me, I know like the first time I experienced like that, I like actually like remember like experienced racism when I was like 5, and like I know in that moment that the white kids that were being racist towards me definitely like didn't have these conversations or like knew what they were doing at all. And it doesn't even matter if they knew what they were doing. It still like impacted me. So I don't know. I guess it's like the onus has like always been on Black families to like have to, at least what I think, has always been on Black families to have to figure out how to navigate the spaces. It's never really been on anyone else. But
I definitely agree with what Yolian said, because white people, they don't talk about race in their families, and when they do, it's wrapped in whiteness because that's what they are. Like growing up Black, race is just an integral part of your life, whether you realize it or not. It just is. And like growing up in the South, everyone was colorblind. You're not colorblind. You were just refusing to acknowledge race. So white families don't talk about race, and when they do, they talk it through a white lens. So at the end of the day, it's not the same as talking racism with the Black family, because growing up with Black skin, racism exists. You feel it. You're a kid, you feel it, you see it, you grow into it, your family talks about it. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that it's funny because like some of my favorite shows or movies right now are like shows about like white fragility. So like Little Fires Everywhere is like an entire show about a white woman's fragility and like inability to address her racism. But I don't know what white people be doing in their families, but I do know that a lot of it is wrapped up in being scared of dealing with racism, of feeling like they can't address those things without feeling like bad people, and all white people really have is like the illusion that they're good people. So I think that's a big part of it. I also, just like don't think about white people in general. But I do know, I just really try not to, but I do know for Black families, it affects our lives deeply because like it creates all these other schisms of like respectability and the need to be perfect and the need to be successful. And it puts pressure on Black kids to be grown-ups at a really young age. So that's the thing that always gets me is like, you don't need white people for racism and domination to exist, but it still sucks because like growing up in families where you have to be perfect is just not possible. It's not possible.
Yeah. Thank you guys. And so now, like, obviously this moment has, as I said before, like been incredibly intense. A lot of folks are calling for the defunding of the police, to divest from the system, to invest in like actual community resources. And so I wanted us to speak to like what work like we're doing in this space and how, the work we're doing can better support like Black children specifically. I know Yolian is doing a lot of work with Yount, so if you wanted to go first.
Yeah, so I actually think it's so wild because I remember like when I first started learning about what even like abolition means, and it was literally like through Twitter, like when I was following Mariam Kaba and like Ruth Wilson, like not following her, but like listening to her stuff and everything. And I just like, that's when I first started learning, was like a few years ago. And so to see this like come to the mainstream, I can't even imagine what it's like for people who have been like invested in that work for so long. So I guess the first question I asked myself when like all of this started to become a part of like the mainstream conversation of like it, being plausible, as it always has been, I kind of looked inwards and to see like what could I do in like my own community. And so I go to the University of North Texas, and the first question that we had was, where could we look for advocating for our, police force to be defunded? And I think that it was a really incredible moment for us because a lot of people came together and we started, building these demands and talking through what does it mean for our police department to be defunded, but the city police department to be defunded as well. And we got to also look into what other departments are like super underfunded. So we actually recently just became a quote unquote like minority majority institution, which is wild because we used to be PWI for so long. And now that that's changed, like we kind of have some sort of leverage because we are literally the majority on our campus. And so we got to really change like how we analyze things and not make it like, oh, like woe is me, we're like a small subsect. Like, no, like we really like the majority now. Like you have to listen to us or you're out. And so we've actually gotten to the point where we have called for our president to resign because he is like not with that action. And I think that we've just recognized like the power that we hold as a community, like within our university, which is like something that I've never seen before. So I think that it's really, really interesting because this is something that's like become a ripple effect, I think, at a lot of universities, like asking for the same thing. So I think that's great. And we based what we're doing largely off of, and I'm not sure if y'all heard of it, I'm pretty sure, but Concerned Student 1950 in Mizzou, like the way that they went about that work that has been the model that we're doing now, which I think is really cool. So yeah, we're learning a lot from what people have done in the past, and we're hoping to see something happen before we graduate.
Could you repeat the question, Kayla?
Yeah, got you. So it was, there has been a lot of like calls for like defunding the police from people on the ground. And so I wanted to speak to like what work y'all were doing like in your communities, or what work you're seeing happening there, and how like those demands could help like Black youth.
Yeah. Working with Generation Green, our focus is Black issues. I think our main focus as an organization is to make Black issues and environmental issues one and the same, because they are, and there's that divide in the environmental movement. And so we just released an episode talking about police brutality, police abolition, the origins of police being slave patrol, and what that means today. And so our work right now is really focused on highlighting those issues and kind of tying them better together, because we work in a space where you wouldn't dare hear an environmentalist say, let's reform the pipelines. Let's re-envision what pipelines look like. Let's use methane instead, you know? That's not a thing, because they understand we need to abolish these pipelines, get them out of here. And so, but where is the environmental movement right now standing up for Black lives? Where are they right now as a whole? Where are the predominantly white environmentalists, where are they at? We're not seeing that. And so right now we're just focusing on, personally, I'm focusing on bridging that gap and changing what environmentalism looks like. It's a Black issue, and if it's a Black issue, then that means police abolition, and just creating and abolishing and creating new systems that we live in is at the top of our list as an organization. And that's just kind of what we're doing right now, particularly in the environmental scene, just because our environment is not just the physical. Our environment is the social, it's our culture, it's the music we listen to, it's the places we live, it's the politics we consume, it's the air we breathe, it's all of it. And so changing what environment looks like, not just in the physical sense, but in the social and political context as well.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask if just making sure I heard your question right. So if you could repeat it one more time.
Yeah. So why, what was the question? Okay, so a lot of folks like on the ground are asking for like defunding the police to really change like the systems that we like live in. And so I wanted us to like talk about like the work we're doing, the work we're seeing in our communities, and how like that would be beneficial to like Black kids, like our people, essentially.
Yeah. So being from Charlotte, also living in Atlanta, there's a really strong abolition movement in Atlanta, but it's a little bit slower in Charlotte. So for me personally, I just started working with the Charlotte for Black Futures Coalition, and am trying to use my writing and journalism to, just like make defunding the police more common sense. So I have an op-ed coming out tomorrow about what that would look like for Charlotte Mecklenburg Police Department. And Charlotte is very like behind the wave when it comes to most social change things. It's like a very like still very Southern liberal city. So when people talk about defunding the cops, that's like never been in the conversation. And I'm sure it will get pushed back, but that's okay. And yeah, so that's what I'm doing personally. And also just trying to really broaden and read up on abolition and transformative justice, because those are really big terms and words. And, you know, it can seem very scary. And I kind of want to make sure that for myself, for the people that are coming into movement work, that we're clear on those things, because like the easiest way for that to fall off is for people to use reforms and call abolition something that is not. So really trying to get clear on what those things are for myself.
Yeah. So one, I'm in the Charlotte for Black Futures like with Clarissa guys, and it's like one of the most amazing like spaces that I've like been in. Like as soon as I got on the first call, I got a bit of like a rush, because I was like, oh my God, there's a bunch of like Black like radicals like in this one group in Charlotte. And so it's really like, that's really cool. And then also I think it's really important to really emphasize like the world we want to create as we're working through like and processing like abolition strategies and listening to Black folks. So if you could speak to like what kind of world we're working towards and the values that we want to uphold, it's like up to any of you.
Yeah, I can start off. So I know for myself, when I think about like what the world we want is, I think about like the work of like the Audre Lordes and Toni Morrisons of like for me specifically, a Black world without police and without prisons, and a world where like we not only keep each other safe, but have like the tools to do that, and the mechanisms to do that. So a lot of it involves like trusting Black people, like having really difficult conversations and keeping people safe. And I think that is like a lot scarier than getting rid of the cops. Like telling liberal systems, conservative systems that we don't need this feels like the immediate work and what we have to do. But for me, I'm always like, okay, so how do I convince my mother that we don't need a world with police, but also that like we can keep survivors safe from abusers, that we can keep each other safe from harm. And so a lot of that is like practicing and figuring it out and getting it wrong, and starting out within your friend groups, right? Like when things happen, how are you like not calling the cops and things like that?
Yeah, I could add to that really quick. I would say like when I think about, and I'm continuing to like challenge myself to think a lot of things, I think I've learned to think in like like I'm anti this or like I'm anti that for like so long. And I'm really like challenging myself to be more positive and look at it in the way that you mentioned, Kayla. And so when I think about that, and I've been having conversations with my parents about it a lot, is like, I guess this sort of like communalism thing where like we, and like Clarissa said, like have this like inherent trust in our communities. And like, I think a lot about, you know, my parents, for example, who are from Eritrea, and they teach me a lot about what it means to really have trust and like be able to just like know that like even though you're not, you know, related to your neighbor, you got your neighbor and your neighbor got you. And I think that like we don't have that in this country. We don't have that like in a lot of places for so many reasons. And I think that I envision like a world like that where I feel like there can be like no ill intention. I think, and that's like a very naive way of thinking, but you can hope, I guess.
No, I would just like to emphasize what both of you guys said, especially what Yount said about rebuilding community, because that's like the very first thing my mom ever, like the most common thing my mom says to me is that America has no values. It has no community values. It doesn't have community. Like back home, your community is your community. That's blood, whether you grew up together or not. You solve problems together. You find solutions together. And then there's not necessarily, I feel like the change that I'd like to see is that we go from an individualistic country where it's all competition to one built on community and trust, and things are just done together, and everything's not so individualistic.
Yeah. So we have like 2 questions in the chat that I'll answer after this last question I have, but just to bring, you know, the climate justice movement together with like Black liberation. We are like the first generation to really feel the effects of the climate crisis, and the last to do anything like meaningful about it. And then Black liberation has been a never-ending fight for centuries. And so why is it so important that we work in solidarity with Black folks, with Black queer folks, with Black like women between these different movements?
To be Black is to be breathless in America, whether that be through environmental racism, whether that be through COVID-19 that's killing Black people at disproportionate rates because of environmental racism, whether it's disproportionately impacting queer women, queer people, disabled people, which are disproportionately impacted by climate crisis in the first place. To separate these movements, I feel like, is to decimate these movements because they are one and the same. You can't liberate or you can't work for one group of people without acknowledging how those sets of struggles are literally directly tied to another group of people's struggles. And so because of that, our work is directly tied together. That's why it's important for those movements to work together, because they are the same movement.
What's helped me like really understand everything, and actually the only reason why I even got involved in like the climate justice movement was literally because it was actually because of Elsa. And it's because like of a Black environmentalist was like, look, like this is a Black issue, like this affects us all. And like then I was like, oh listen, we all have, like, it's all rooted in the same issues. Like it's all rooted in white supremacy, capitalism, like the patriarchy, colonialism, like every freaking thing. So I was like, there's no reason to separate them. And I guess ever since I realized that, like I look at everything, I guess, semi the same. What I mean that like I know what it takes to like, that it's gonna have to take the same types of things being destroyed for us to like actually be free. So yeah, I guess that's how I see it.
Yeah, I was gonna say I was definitely not on the environmental wave until I was actually I call her my movement mother, but she's not. She's just like the person that like really was the first person to like scold me when I got into movement, because I was like very hot-headed. But Sharanthi, who's an organizer in Minneapolis, was like telling me about like environmental racism and lead poisoning, and I was like, oh, okay, whatever. And then I got the job at 350, and it really kind of came together for me. And I will also say like the point about Black liberation is important because we know it's going to take our generation and the next and however long to get there. And that feels very far away, but that feels possible with like other Black people. Like 350 is not a radical organization, but it is doing more radical work now because there are like 5 or 6 Black women that work there now. And like we led like the white supremacy webinar. And while that looks really cute for 350, you know, that took Black labor to happen. And it took us pushing and being like, we're in a time of upheaval and we need to tell our base like that this is important. So a lot of times like my faith in movement or in whatever really comes from other Black people and our ability to like just make shit shake. Like nobody can really do that like Black people. And yeah, we just always show up for each other. So that's what always keeps me in this.
Yeah. And so how can people like watching at home support our work? And how can they like get involved?
Yeah, I think if we're learning anything today from our illustrious J. Cole, it's that we all need to be reading a book, a text by a Black feminist. You need to be reading Black feminism, specifically The Art of War, The Alchemist. You're not going to cut it. You gotta like read Black feminism specifically. And I also know I'm forgetting it, but there are also some like amazing Black environmentalists. Even like the term like environmental racism was created by a Black person who went to Clark, Atlanta. So like there's a long legacy of Black farm workers and Black environmentalism. So find those texts, research them, but also like, I know liberalism can like feel like the easy go-to around like, yeah, this is comfortable. I want to focus on voting and focus on electoral politics. And that is the easy win, but that will always be the work because electoral politics keeps you in that system. And if we want something different, we have to like get to abolition and Black feminism, because those are the things that bring us to the root of the issues.
For me, I mean, and this is like what's helped me get to a point where like I was tired of like electoral politics and liberalism and everything, like moving towards it, was like I switched up my Twitter feed. Like it literally changed everything for me. And I suggest like finding like radical Black folks on Twitter, and like for if you're like a social media person, and like that has helped me like guide me to figure out who, like what I should be reading. And then that's kind of like, that was my gateway to education, of like educating myself. So I would say it's just like changing up like what you like ingest as like political education or content, because that fixes everything. Like stop following like, I don't know, I can't tell you what not to follow, but like you don't have to focus on AOC, you can focus on like literally anyone else. Like, you know, follow at Prison Culture, like follow all of these other people that like really will tell you what's up. And I think that's what's gonna tell you that you got a lot more reading to do than you thought. And that's what helped me.
Yeah, I'd say just listen. Like, damn, listen, because the answers are here. The information is here. We don't need to go in circles because that's what we're doing. So while you're reading, if you're not, listen to what other people are saying. Listen to what Black women are saying, because we've been on this. We does this. We've been here. So listen, and also for y'all, the people that are watching that have really bad attention spans like me, Angela Davis has her speeches on Spotify. You can listen, because the way my ADHD is set up, those Spotify playlists come through. Like I can listen and I can learn at the same time.
Yeah, I was just gonna add just super quickly. I also think like, especially for this conversation, like cis Black women specifically also have to like sit with their own privilege, especially like with the deaths of like Black trans women. Like there's a lot of conversation where Black cis women just like are not able to like sit and listen. And I know that's difficult being like, yeah, just where the identity sits. But I think it's important specifically to like, yeah, sit with what that means for you, and be there for the sisters that we have in this struggle.
Yeah, so I think that following Black leadership is a really solid way to end this like panel for us. I think it's definitely like, it kind of summarizes some of the other questions in the chat. And so again, like thank everybody for like sitting here and listening to us. Like this is really like healing for me. I love being around like other like Black people for stuff like this. And if you guys have any lasting words, like go for it.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say, I see the question about like how to support defunding and abolition. Very similar to the thing about the Spotify playlist. I listen to a lot of podcasts. My introduction to abolition was actually listening to Mariam Kaba's podcast about transformative justice and abolition. So there's a podcast called How to Survive the End of the World by Adrienne Brown and her sister. And they talked to Mariam Kaba about what abolition means and like, what does it mean to think about consequences versus punishments? And yeah, that was my light bulb moment where I was like driving and I was like, oh, got you. So yeah, podcasts have been a really great space for me. And yeah, like lean into it, lean into the uncomfortability, because like that is like the work, not just Twitter.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you all so much for joining us. It is always a pleasure to hear from you and, you know, have your presence. I really appreciate you all taking the time during, you know, these insanely busy times, you know, for everyone to join us. It's really fantastic to have you on. For folks who want to learn more, I definitely, Yolian's tip about changing your Twitter feed and who you follow. I have genuinely gone into, you know, who Elsa and Kayla and Yolian and Clarissa are following and just followed a bunch of people based on that. And that has genuinely helped me, you know, learn more about these issues than probably anything else I've done. It's a great first step for those wanting to get involved. And then also please check out the resources that they talked about. So thank you all so much for being on. Have a great day. Thank you for joining us. And thank you for doing this work.
Of course.
Thanks, y'all. Bye, everyone.
What a fantastic last live panel that we had today. Really quickly, Elsa, Yolian, and Kayla have all been on our podcast recently. And we're going to get Clarissa eventually, you just know it. But I'd just like to play for you the trailer for our episode that was just released yesterday. Our podcast is called Our Future Now, and this specific episode had Anthony Rogers Wright, who is an amazing organizer in the climate justice world, and Devin Del Palacio, who's a school board member and the chair of the National Black Council on the National Association of School Boards. We talked about defunding the police, what Congress is doing right now, what you can do to get your city council and your mayor to change their policies and to really make a difference in your community and make sure that money is going to communities, not to destructive forces within communities. Take a listen to this trailer.
Hello.
Wrong video. There we go.
But I think what he's missing is that lynching is more than a crime. It is terrorism. It is designed to instill terror in an individual and in a family and in a community in order to keep the same systems in place that have been in place since the beginning of this country, which is white supremacy.
Yeah. And so that, I think, really fantastically puts it. That's Natalie Mebane, my co-host of that podcast. So please check out Our Future Now. You can listen to it wherever you get your podcasts. And so we really, have all these great guests on. 3 of the 4 people that you just heard from have been on the podcast. So go check out all those episodes. If you want to check out also some other things that they're talking about Black environmentalism, environmental justice. We've had panels on Monday and Tuesday about environmental racism and environmental justice. So if you've missed those, please go check out the live streams on YouTube and Facebook. The past ones have been archived. So please go listen and watch those. We've got some great guests there like Mustafa Ali, Natalie Mebane, Kevin J. Patel, Diana Fernandez, Dr. Mona Hana Atisha. So many great folks, and we have more throughout the week. And lastly, before I move into our last panel, please support the Movement for Black Lives. They have a day of action coming up this Friday for Juneteenth. So please check them out. We are partnering with them and endorsing all of their demands. You can read them on the screen right now. And lastly, please go support the Poor People's Campaign. They have their annual Poor People's March this Saturday, June 20th. We are partnering with them on that. We were fortunate enough to have Reverend Barber, the leader, one of the 2 national co-chairs of the Poor People's Campaign, on our National Children's Week and National Children's Day celebration earlier. And so it was great to have him on. Please go support him and support the Poor People's Campaign. And with that, I'm going to bring us over to our last section of the day, child immigration. We have some great videos from Alphabet Rockers again, so some nice musical performances, and a couple videos from our partners at the Butterfly Effect, Migration is Beautiful. We'll get those on the screen in just a sec.
Something is happening in our country right now today that needs our attention and our activism. I'm Kaya and I'm 11. I'm Lily and I'm 10. And together we started the Butterfly Effect. We wanted to stand up for immigrant families so people would realize just how many children are being held in detention centers. We believe that every kid matters, so we started the Butterfly Effect. We chose butterflies because they teach us that migration is beautiful. Also, butterflies are all different and beautiful in their own way, just like people. We decided to make one butterfly for each of the 15,000 immigrant children in the detention centers at the border. Butterflies stand for hope, love, and friendship. Imagine what would happen if we all made butterflies as a way of standing up for kids in detention centers. You can help by making butterflies and putting them up in your community. After you make your butterflies, look at our website to learn more ways to take a stand for the children in detention. Together, we can change this. Please join us. Hi, Lily. Hi, Kaya. Hi. I've been thinking, you're my actor buddy.
Of course.
You're the lead to my Kai, or Kylie.
Of course.
I've been thinking about how much we've done together since we met.
Yeah, like we went from 0 to like 55,000 butterflies. We've had a rally. We've done so many things. We've gone to DC, had a press conference with Nancy Pelosi.
Yeah. I'm really glad we did it together. You really matter to me.
Yeah, thank you, Kaya. You matter to me too. I love you.
I love you too. And right now, we need to lift up Black lives. Black lives matter. Your life matters.
Thank you, Kaya, for not only being my actor buddy, but for also being my ally.
The butterfly effect stands with Black Lives Matter.
Something is happening in our country right now today that needs our attention and our activism. I'm Kaya and I'm 11. I'm Lily and I'm 10. And together we started the Butterfly Effect. We wanted to stand up for immigrant families so people would realize just how many children are being held in detention centers. So we started the Butterfly Effect. We decided to make one butterfly for each of the 15,000 immigrant children in the detention centers at the border. Imagine what would happen if we all made butterflies as a way of standing up for kids in detention centers.
Yo, until you're free, I'll be learning about your life and rights. Looking out for what you need, working to adjust my sight. See, until you're free, I'll be stepping up physically, putting focus on the real pick, taking responsibility. I'm not trying to live in a world that wants to remove you. I'm trying to be in a place with space to include you. We out here playing by rules that muffle the truth, which eventually becomes soundproof. Say it loud.
I'm the one standing up. I'm the one standing up. I'll be lifting you up. I'll be lifting you up. I will never slow down. I will never slow down. No better time than now. No better time than now. You're free, until you're free. We'll be louder and stronger together. Time's up, dream. Time's up, speak. Time's up, lead. Time's up, believe. That the time is now. That we got the power. Stand up side by side, impossible to break us down. Time's up, dream. Time's up, speak. Time's up, lead. Time's up, believe. That the time is now, that we got the power. Stand up side by side, impossible to break us down.
We can make a bigger voice. We can make it twice as loud. We can make a better choice. We can be proud.
Ven conmigo y alcemos una sola voz. Que se escuche en cada esquina de este mundo. Tú decides, puedes elegir mejor. Sentir orgullo de lo que logramos juntos.
Now is the time though. Yeah, but you gon' need some spine though. Yeah, you gon' need some backbone. We lost love, it's time to find it, bring it back home. Turn the lights on, where the lights at? Your presence is a present. It's time to fight back. Stand up, stand out. Do everything but stand down. Have heart, play your part. Do what you can now. The future ain't no mystery. Choices dictate everything that you finna see. You either spectate or you create. You either at the table or be what's on the plate.
Somos más fuertes cuando nos unimos. Ser solidarios es lo que elegimos. No se trata de lo mío, no se trata de lo tuyo. Yo te apoyo, doy mi mano, lo hago con orgullo. I'm not free until you're free. We'll be louder and stronger together. Are we free? If you're not free, can we be louder and stronger together? Time's up, dream. Time's up, speak. Time's up, lead. Time's up, believe. That the time is now, that we got the power. Stand up side by side, impossible to break us down. Time's up, dream. Time's up, speak. Time's up, lead. Time's up, believe. That the time is now, that we got the power. Stand up side by side, impossible to break us down.
what a great way to close out our day. An update to that last figure on the screen. It is no longer at 43,000 butterflies made, but our partners at the Butterfly Effect, Migration is Beautiful, have now made 55,000 butterflies and have been fighting every single day on behalf of children in the detention centers. So if you want to check them out, please visit butterflyeffectmigration.org. Please go support their work. They are working tirelessly, a group of 11 and 12-year-olds, to free the children who are being put in the detention centers. So please check them out. And with that, I'm going to leave you for today. It's been an awesome day. We've had, 3 great sections, some amazing content. We will see you tomorrow for an amazing day. We have a few different panels. We have things on healthcare and mental health, 4 different events coming right at you. So stay tuned. We will, have you joining us tomorrow morning at 1 o'clock Eastern, 10 o'clock Pacific. Please join us. We will see you then. Thank you so much for tuning in to National Children's Week, and we will see you tomorrow. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.